Option 1. Ethanol as a fuel source. Environmental impact. Ethanol.
Ethanol is an alcohol-based fuel made by fermenting and distilling starch crops such as corn. It can also be made from trees and grasses. The use of ethanol can reduce our dependence upon foreign oil and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It is composed of 2 carbons, 6 hydrogens, and 1 oxygen.
The creation of ethanol. Sugar for ethanol fermentation comes from many sources of starch or sugar crops. Most of the ethanol in the U.S. comes from corn because it's most plentiful. 33% of the U.S. is cornfields. 40% of those cornfields go to the production of ethanol. Fermentation process.
There are 2 ways to ferment corn. The first way is dry milling. The fermentation begins with the process of grinding the kernels into small particles. After this, water and enzymes are added to the corn to convert the starch for fermentation. This mixture is then cooked, heated, and finally cooled into a condensed liquid. Then it is dehydrated to remove extra water, making it suitable to blend with gasoline. There's also wet milling, where corn is soaked in water and acid to separate many components. Then the corn is separated from the fiber gluten's and starches. Then the starch and water are converted into ethanol.
The top 5 ethanol producing countries. The top 5 ethanol producing countries are the U.S., Brazil, Europe, China, then Canada. The U.S. had the most produced ethanol with 13.9 billion gallons. Then Brazil with 5.57 billion gallons. After was Europe with 1.17 billion gallons. Also China produced 0.55 billion gallons. Lastly was Canada with 0.46 billion gallons of ethanol produced. Carbon-based crops.
The primary crop from the United States is corn, whereas the main carbon-based crop in Brazil is sugarcane. Thirdly, Europe uses multiple carbon-based crops such as beets and other sugar crops. China uses maize and sugarcane as their carbon-based crops, while Canada uses maize and wheat.
Carbon emissions.
Ethanol is shipped by truck or rail. Additional transportation needs could slightly increase the nation's total emissions due to heavy-duty truck and train engines. According to the Texas State Energy Conservation Office, adding ethanol to gasoline helps it to burn more completely and significantly reduces vehicle emissions. March 2007 DOE study found that the greenhouse gas emissions from corn-based ethanol are 18 to 28% lower than those from gasoline, while cellulosic ethanol greenhouse gas emissions are 87% lower.
The carbon cycle. Crops like corn and sugarcane are harvested to make ethanol. 33% of the U.S. is cornfields. 40% of those cornfields are used for ethanol production, meaning that 13.2% of the U.S.'s cornfields are used for ethanol production. These crops are grounded up into little particles. They are then separated by their component sugars. For example, corn has 2 ways of production: dry milling and wet milling. For the ethanol to be usable as a fuel, the majority of the water must be removed. Most of the water is removed by distillation. Distillation is the method of separating mixtures based on the differences in volatility of components in a boiling liquid mixture. After the ethanol is created, it is put into a fuel. About 10% of the fuel is ethanol. When a car is running, it releases carbon dioxide, CO2. The CO2 is released, then it gets reabsorbed by the crops that will soon be producing more ethanol. Why is ethanol good?
Ethanol is good because it increases jobs and businesses to small towns in the Midwest. It also gives just normal people more jobs. Farmers' wealth. It provides farmers with a new market for their crops and generates a lot of revenue for them. If we increase the use of ethanol in our fuel blends, we will be less dependent on fossil fuels and foreign fuels.
Why is ethanol bad? Ethanol has increased the price of crops and commodities in the nation because ethanol has become too expensive to produce. Blended fuels with a high percent of ethanol is not popular in the U.S. population. People are not interested in ethanol. If the price of the sugar, corn, and other commodities continues to increase, it may increase the hunger among the poor because they will not be able to afford the expensive crops. The end.